Welcome. Hey, everyone. Good to see you. We are delighted. Thank you again, Jay, for making it possible for us to do this panel. It's a bit different than many of the topics that are the other panels, in the sense that I don't know that we're going to get that technical about any of these, iconic products, but the approach that we're taking is really talking about the revolution that Apple initiated and fomented, and in this case, mostly focusing on its early business model, moving into its marketing philosophy, and then my area is kind of the bigger cultural impact that it has left for us. So I'm Dr. Ann Balsamo, and I teach here at the University of Texas at Dallas, and my appointment is in the School of Arts, Humanities, and Technology. You'll see later, I'll introduce my lab. I run a lab called the Media Archaeology Lab, and we'll tell you about the demos that we're running there. So we are kind of the academic traveling companions to VCF, and have been really appreciating kind of getting to know and become part of that community. So I'm a local and kind of local host, but we have a special guest who agreed to come. This is Mr. Henry Whitfield, and I met him through a kind of an interest in kind of the early advertising opportunities or the early advertising examples. He was the director of marketing.
Advertising.
I'm sorry, director of advertising at Apple Computer, and I didn't listen. I just said early 80s, early 1980s.
Yeah, I was there from 81 to 84.
So I didn't know the exact date, so I was like, okay, circa 1980s.
Yeah.
And what we're going to talk about today is some of the early, very kind of foundational moves that Apple made when they were setting up the original business and then moved into developing a marketing philosophy. And so I just want to give a shout out to the Media Archaeology Lab. We have several of my research student team members who are here, so they'll be around all afternoon and in our space where we're giving demos. The other thing that I'm interested in, this is the frame that I take on this topic, which is I teach a course called Introduction to Technoculture. It's a foundation course for all sorts of freshmen here at UTD. So a lot of my work really is at the intersection of technology and culture. How do we learn about technology through cultural means, like marketing, advertising, spectacles, and then how does technology impact the kind of cultural experiences that we have and change the culture that we inhabit. So we are going to start with Henry. Again, I have it wrong. It's Director of Advertising. And this is what we talked about kind of last night, just some topics that we were going to talk about. Kind of Apple's early business approach, because you were talking from hobbyist to how they stood up the business. Talk a little bit about that idea you said about closing the chasm, the revolution in marketing, all the things that they had done that was really that were the firsts. And then I think what we'll end with is a kind of few stories leading up to the making of that iconic commercial, the making of 1984. So, and I'll show the commercial later on, but by that time we have many other stories beforehand and then the commercial, and then we can talk about the kind of more details about the production of the commercial in the question and answer. So is that good?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm putting this up. This is you can see the Apple's early business approach. So I pulled the first ad that you had. That is, there's two first ads. This is one that you showed, and another first one appeared in Interface magazine. It was 1976, and it kind of represents the first step of Apple to bring what was a pretty amazing prototype to a wider audience. And I don't know if you want to chat about that.
I mean, this ad, so let me give you a little bit of history. So the timeline, and I thought it might be helpful to go over that. Apple was started actually in 1976. So, and I was there in 81. Got there in 81. So they were already cooking when I got there. I think they had, the sales at that time were, 81. They were about 120 million when I got there. When I left, we were 1.5 billion. So it was like riding a rocket ship. It was kind of like, OpenAI is now. It just like took off. And I was very fortunate because I was a young guy. I was like 31, and they had been using. Steve wrote this ad. He wrote most of it, and there was another companion ad, and this was for their original board, and they made 200 of those in his garage in Cupertino, and those are things that are now worth anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million. You probably know. But it amazes me how fast they went from those first 200 boards. And he met a guy named Mike Markla. Steve was very good, as you probably know, in picking up the phone and call. He would call anybody.
They can't see that. Sorry.
Oh, okay,
We had a slide transfer.
Yeah, here's a picture of. These are the first.
Might have to be old school.
We can't get it on the.
We can't get it on the other app.
This is the tech convention, and we can't. For some reason, we waited till the last minute, and it didn't load. So anyway, this is Mike Markla was a guy from the semiconductor business. Steve called him, and anyway, short story. Mike wrote him a check for $250,000, and that was the first money that they really had. The money before that was Wozniak and Steve. And he also he stayed with Apple for about quite a few years, 15 years, I think. And he was CEO, acting CEO. He was actually, without Mike Markla, Apple wouldn't have happened because Steve was, running around in Birkenstocks, and he was not easy to deal with. And so Mike was kind of the adult supervision in the room. So anyway, they used another guy that Steve reached out to, was a very famous guy named Regis McKenna, who ran a big PR firm. And this PR firm was focused on the semiconductor companies at that time, which were Fairchild Semiconductor, National Semiconductor, and the early tech companies in Silicon Valley. And he had a great reputation. So Steve picked up the phone, called him, and he said, yeah, I'll help you. And so he got him introduced to venture capital fund, a fellow named Arthur Rock, and it just took off from there.
I'm talking. I just want to make one note about that before the 250,000. The founding of it, 1976. They date that to the first time that Steve Wozniak made the presentation of the hand-soldered, handmade, what we now refer to as the Apple I. He presents it as in the framework, as it's a kit, presents it to the Palo Alto Computer Club, and somebody in the audience is really taken with it. That somebody in the audience was the owner of a local electronics store that called Byte, not the Byte magazine. And the linchpin between that early demonstration, where people were blown away by the capacity of what Steve Wozniak could build, a bespoke chip, the kit, all the elements of the kit, it was all then integrated, but it was all a kit. They weren't delivering. The owner of Byte Electronics Store ordered 200 of them, but didn't want the kits. The electronics store wanted the integrated system. So the first purchase for those 200
Right.
were not the 250. They were, maybe 75,000. And as the story goes, is that when kind of gives them the kit, and the guy says, I don't want the kit, I want the assembled product. Jobs gets the epiphany for a computer company that bases its whole business model on the delivery of an all-in-one, off-the-shelf, easy to use, not necessarily only for the hobbyists, kind of computer. So that is then, I think, the kind of business epiphany that Steve had, but had no idea how to do anything with that.
Right. Wozniak was a geek. I mean, he was a hardware enthusiast and worked for HP. And he apparently was a genius. I'm not a hardware guy at all. But still, the design of the Apple II is considered for its day and what the innovation that it brought. It was considered a real amazing piece of work. And Steve realized that if they were going to build a real company, because Steve always wanted to build a company, Wozniak just wanted to make stuff. And Steve realized that if they could put everything on it, like a keyboard and a monitor and software and a way to have storage, you would have a real product that everybody could buy. So that was Steve's real contribution to that. Wozniak was not thinking in that area. He just wanted to build kits for hobbyists. So anyway, I want to talk a little bit about why I was very fortunate to have been there, because I went through the Apple II, which was the first integrated unit. I mean, this was when they had just started selling them, and we were really ramping. They had just hired Chiat Day, which is the agency that they use now. There was a real couple of genius copywriters. One of them I think still works on the account, Lee Clow. He and a guy named Steve Hayden did the concept for the 1984 board.
Here's the images of some of the early advertisements you were talking about last night.
These ads here, excuse me, I guess. So Regis McKenna was a PR guy, but he had a little agency. He saw a lot of his clients were saying, can you run some ads for us? So he started a little ad division of his PR agency in San Francisco. And he was friends with this guy named Jay Chiat, who had this kind of renegade Southern California agency. And Steve immediately loved Jay Chiat. And so they worked collaboratively for the first 3 years on Apple ads. And you can see they're kind of these on the one on the left and the one on the right. They tried a lot of different techniques, and it took Apple several years to really gel and say, you know what, we really need a look. We need something that it'll be the Apple look. And even today, their ads are fit kind of the precepts that evolved, and some of those things were.
And here's a couple that you showed me last night, which was, again, more of, the kind of random all over. Yeah. And then they got to this point where it was, they were cleaner and they were very story driven.
Right.
They didn't always kind of feature the machines. Many of their first ads were for professionals that they wanted to engage. So Reedy Chiara is a engineer. They wanted to appeal to scientists. And then they kind of branched out, as you were telling me last night, to engaging families and the education market. So families,
this
education.
campaign on these two ads here, there were a series of 5 of them, and that they won an Addy for that, which is a big deal in the advertising industry. And that's when they started to use cleaner layouts and less copy. And some of the things, I was doing some research on this just to refresh my memory, and Markula and Steve wrote a thing in 1977. This is right when he funded Apple. They sat down and said, what is our philosophy? And it's kind of like companies now do mission statements, and they have a formalized process for putting all this together. It really didn't exist at that time. Companies, I mean, it wasn't as formulaic as it is now for all these startup companies. But here are the things that they came up with for their marketing philosophy. Empathy. We will understand the needs better than any other company. And I think it's ironic because Steve was known for, he didn't give a hoot about focus groups or research or any of that. But the important thing was the empathy. Steve knew that they needed to have an emotional connection with people in their advertising and not just sell, the bytes and the bits. The next thing was focus. So in order to do a good job of these things, we decide we must eliminate all the unimportant opportunities. And so, in other words, focus on a few things and do them really, really well. And another guy that has that same philosophy is Elon Musk. He has his first principles. I don't know if you follow Elon, but it's like, get to the real core of what we're trying to do and don't worry about, all these different things. So focus was a real thing of Steve's. And then imputation or impute. And so a lot of what Apple did, and Steve understood this, was by having high quality advertising. Everything should be quality. The boxes, the packaging should be high quality. The details of the machine, how the molding, everything. He was a complete fanatic about all of that. But his idea was, and I think it was correct, that most companies at the time were not paying any attention. It was just, they were ugly boxes and no real thought given to the design. Steve realized that design was a real important element of building a brand image. And Apple still does that. They've done it their whole existence.
I think we have, the one I wanted to show was this one. I think it's about big events.
Oh, yeah, we can, yeah. So another thing that Apple did, and this was important, and this was something that I also helped contribute to, and that is this idea of the leader educates. Now today, what does that mean? That means that if you're trying, how many of you are familiar with a book called Crossing the Chasm?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'd urge you to read it. It was written in 1991, but it kind of formularizes what happens when a new technology is being created and how some of those technologies die and some make it and become large companies, and what has to happen. And there are several stages, and Apple followed these to the T. So the first stage is the enthusiast. So they went after Woz's hobby clubs, computer clubs. There was one called the Homebrew Computing Club in the Bay Area that was very famous. And it was all about, the geeks. Then the next level are the visionaries. And these are people who get excited by the tech. They see the potential and they're willing to take the risk to buy the product really early. Like, how many of you guys are using ChatGPT? Okay, so I'm surprised it's not everybody, but we're going through that early adoptive process now, and we're in the period where it's really the visionaries that want to experiment with it, want to get their hands on it, want to try it out, and that's what's happening. That was what was happening with the Apple II. They weren't they weren't geeks, so they didn't want to add their own keyboard and all of that. But when the Apple II came out, it was everything they needed to try it out, experiment, and that's when the Mac or the Apple II just took off. The next stage is the pragmatist, and these are people those guys in the other ad I would call them pragmatists. So these are guys that, okay, this is a real good machine. I'm in the business of training dolphins. How can I use this to train my dolphins? And so they, in their own way, figure out how to use the machine for their use case. And so Apple realized that that was really important, that if you could get enough of these people in this stage, in the pragmatists that were really hands-on and would use it, that would then go to the next phase, which is, and then this is where they call it the chasm. A guy named Jeffrey Moore wrote this book. It's called Crossing the Chasm. And that's when Apple realized that you had to really go to bring in the conservatives, the doubters, okay? And that's what advertising can help you do. So the advertising program really gets in more people in the pragmatist stage that are just, they want to know, what can I do with this that'll make my life better?
And there's the ad.
Yeah, and so we did an ad like this, which was, and I actually helped research all these. And this was in 1981, I think. Mm-hmm. And so we were trying to show, get more of these pragmatists. And so we were trying to just appeal to everybody. So if you read through some of these software programs, a lot of the software was junk, but they existed. You know, it was very early. And so we just listed all of these different software packages that were available. And we ran this. Another thing that we did, and Steve, this was Jay Hyatt's idea, and Steve understood it too, and I did too, that instead of running a bunch of little ads and a little campaign, and you have to think back, during that time, we didn't have the internet, right? So print advertising was very important. And there were only 3 TV channels, ABC, NBC, CBS. So it was a completely different media universe. So, and in ways, it was very much easier to dominate. And so we realized that our media strategy was to go after very prestigious publications. So the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, some of the business publications. We realized, for example, that we had to get engineers and OEMs that would add new things to the Apple II, so you could, like boards and research sensors and that kind of thing. So we advertised in the IEEE magazine. So we would pick the most.
And this was the New York Times.
This was the New York Times.
Yeah.
And we ran a full-page ad, and I think we ran it just a couple of times. And the other thing we realized was when we run these ads, these giant ads, it was like, what? Who are these people? What is this Apple computer? And it would create all this buzz. So that was the way we created buzz back then. We didn't have Twitter and all this stuff. So we created buzz by running in these giant ads in these prestigious magazines. Like another one was Fortune. We ran big ads in Fortune. We ran them in, all the major prestigious publications. And then the same thing in education. So one of the things that we realized very early on, and we also realized that long term it would favor us, it helped build a brand, is to get in early on education. So we had a whole big program targeted towards schools. And we collaborated with them and with software developers to create programs for kids in school. And so there were a lot of very influential education publications, and we ran ads in those. So it was a very extensive program. Everybody talks about the TV advertising, but actually when I left, Apple's ad budget was $100 million, if you can imagine. We had the biggest ad budget on the West Coast. It was insane. And and it was very sophisticated. They did a great job. I think some of my contributions were important, and there were a lot of people involved. But it was we really pushed that pragmatist market to get people to start using this. Okay. I want to just say, does anybody have any questions at this point, and is this the right tack to take? Because I could go on for days, but I'm not boring you?
This is good. There we go.
Good.
Okay.
I do have some questions, but I want to
Yeah.
So
right.
I wanted to mention something that is in not the fine print, which is 400. I don't even know. There's
I forget how many.
But
Quite a
in
few.
the fine print, it says with these and thousands of office-ready programs you can choose from.
Yep.
You can do most everything with an Apple. More things with an Apple than you can do with other computers. So then there's a critical part in here. So over 1,200 authorized Apple dealers have
Right.
a question for you. What do you want to do? So talk about the evolution that they didn't have a production. I mean, they had a production chain, but a
distribution channel.
So you can talk about that.
Yeah, that was a whole nother thing that we worked on. So when Steve, we've already talked about the Byte Computer Shop, and this was like a hobbyist store, and there were a lot. I mean, we were in Silicon Valley, so there was a lot of technology. I mean, for the time,
Did Fry's exist back then?
Pardon?
Fry's?
Fry's. Oh yeah, that was my favorite store.
Yeah.
I lived 3 blocks.
R.I.P.
Yeah. So there was a lot of geeks in the valley. I mean, there just were. And so it wasn't like, so that was the original market. And Byte Computer Store was, the Byte Shop, they called it, served all these people that were working on all kinds of technology in the valley. And Steve realized that if they were going to sell, get into these other markets, the pragmatist and make a big brand, they needed a channel, and Mike Markkula knew how to do that. So very quickly they started building a channel. Now we weren't the only one. Apple, there was also Commodore, there was Radio Shack, there were quite a few companies. There were like 12 companies, right? Boom, just like that, like out of nothing, from 1976 to when the first really viable processor chip came out. A lot of companies were created. It was kind of like a gold rush that is happening now with electric cars and any new technology. Everybody's 400 disk drive companies, same thing. When different disk drives were invented, there were like 25 companies. So Apple was just one company. So we had. There was the early formation of these retail stores. They were mostly hobbyist shops. It was really a potpourri of stereo shops, high-end audio for high-end for the time. So
And
those
like Computerland.
and then Computerland.
Yeah.
There was a guy that started Computerland, and a guy from Texas, and I forget the guy's name. I think it's Billy something or other. And he saw the potential in this. And so between Computerland and this guy that I can't remember his name, Billy something or other, from Texas, I think from Dallas, actually, wanted to build a chain of stores that would sell computers because they could see that this was going to be a thing. So Steve, we realized that very early on. So and most of these guys didn't have a clue about how to market on a mass basis. So they would just put up their sign and hope people would come in. So we provided them with a lot of what we call co-op materials. So if they bought Apple, every time they bought one of inventory from us, they would get we'd put some money in an account that they could use towards their advertising. And then we would provide to them the ads, and they could pick whichever ads they wanted to run to make it really easy for them to place these ads because they wouldn't do it otherwise. And so we had a big program of co-op advertising. I had 4 people managing co-op advertising by the time I left, and keeping track of all the credits and helping them place the ads and all of that. That was also a big contribution to Apple's success. Was they got in there and they owned the distribution channel and helped build it very early. So that was a really important aspect of their success.
But unlike Tandy and Radio Shack, it wasn't branded Apple. These were partnerships, it wasn't the Apple Store.
No, it wasn't the Apple Store. These were independent dealers. Yeah, we just helped them. And so by us helping them and having a very sophisticated help program, they would give deference to our machines, and we tried to make it easy for them to make sales. We gave them scripts to use. We had direct mail program. I mean, we had a massive program.
You have one right over your shoulder.
Yeah,
there.
This is the one we did for the Lisa and the Apple III, and it's kind of interesting. What we did, and this took a lot of work, and actually it was one of my concepts, but what we did was we sent out a postcard to the dealers and said, okay, if we'll do a direct mail program for you, all you need to do, we have 3 different mailings, one to the business market, one to the education market, and one to the, what was the other one? I forget. Anyway, they could check a box, and we would check their credit and see how many they could mail to use up their credit, and then we would do the placement for them. So all they had to do was check a box on the postcard, and these would go out. And we did the mailing list. We did these were all customized for their store. They were all personalized. So it was, for the time, it was super sophisticated, and it took a lot of work. And this was very successful. So there was a lot of things that people don't realize that helped contribute to Apple's early success. So my point is, it was a very comprehensive kind of program.
Right. So I was going, when we talked about crossing the chasm, can you talk about, you also had a slide, so it was the big ads, you talked about swag, there were a number of...
Oh, you're talking about this one?
Yes, go. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So I think Apple did do a lot. We had retreats sometimes where Steve would get up and go on, and various people in the company. We have some very, very smart people. And so there was a lot of thought given into all of these aspects that I've just described. So one of the things that these are some of the strategies that I think thinking about them, that we use. And one was was somehow create an emotional connection. It's not just about regurgitating, it has so many bytes, it has this much memory, but somehow create an emotional connection. And Apple is a master at that, absolute master. And that's why they get gross margins that are like 5 times higher than anybody else, because people are paying because they're emotionally vested in the brand. All right. Another thing was they realized everything had to be simple, very clear, visually pleasing, very aesthetic, and that's carried through ever since. Also, if you'll notice, and even today they do it, real customer stories. These are talking about these people that do stuff with the Apple and showing examples, and it kind of gives people an inspiration, like, well, if he can do it and it made his business that much more successful, then I need to get cracking and get out there and buy one of these things, So there was a lot of aspirational, inspirational components to the advertising that they still do. Another thing was consistency. you saw the cluttery looks of the early ads. Now, if you see an Apple ad, you pretty much know it's an Apple ad. And there's not very many companies that can say that, because I was in the advertising business for 5 years before Apple, worked on a bunch of different brands. And every year it's like, what are we going to do this year? So Apple didn't look at it that way. They looked at it like we're building a brand image. They had the long-term view, a very sophisticated view of building, always adding to the power of the brand, and they do that masterfully.
Can you talk about the very kind of counterintuitive ad that said "Thank you, IBM"? Was it?
Oh yeah. So the Mac was late. If you've read, how many of you read the biography of Steve Jobs? Okay, so you know a lot of this stuff. And I just recently got around to reading it, and it reminded me he was a very difficult guy. He was really. I'm surprised I lasted 3.5 years, but anyway, I think. What were we going to ask?
It was about the ad. This is to your point about establishing them as
welcoming IBM. So that was a very cool thing.
Yeah.
So that was totally Steve's idea. Mm-hmm. The Mac was a year late, and we had been up there. We had seen we knew what it was. I mean, they introduced their machine, and Steve was very dismissive of it, said it's a piece of crap, it's a piece of junk, but they were IBM, and we knew they were a serious force. We were also getting a lot of competition from Radio Shack with Bill Gates, and because Microsoft partnered with them, and we had Commodore was still a thing. So it was a competitive market. So Steve came up with this idea of running a full-page ad saying, "Welcome IBM." Okay, why would he do that, right? So what it did, first of all, we used the big format, so it got incredible amount of buzz. Everybody in business publications was like, "What did they do? What did and what it really did, it was very sophisticated. It established immediately that there were only two competitors in the market, IBM and Apple. And Commodore wasn't even mentioned. Why bother with Commodore? Why bother with Tandy? Why bother with, all these other people? It's really a two-horse race. So that was one thing that the ad did. And it created immediately a positioning of IBM. Okay, they're the big companies. They're the corporate computer company. We're the computer company for the people, for the average guy. And so it had that effect. And we ran it, I think, once in the Wall Street Journal, I believe. Yeah, that was it.
Welcome IBM.
Welcome IBM.
We look forward to the friendly competition.
Exactly.
Is one of the taglines.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was kind of cool. What else?
I want to go to, there's one more kind of element, and it's about the spectacle, the media events, the big kind of experiential.
The events, yeah.
Because we're going to lead up to the...
Well, there was actually two more things that I didn't talk about. So one was that, and I will talk about that. The other was developer evangelism. So we knew as a company that we had there were several people. We had a good sales people that knew what they were doing. I forget the guy's name that was running sales, but they were very, very good people. They knew what they were doing. And they knew to get this list of all these software programs, we wanted to foster that and just get it to explode. And Apple's still trying to do that now with their Vision Pro. They're trying to get people to write software. So we had a very famous guy named Guy Kawasaki, and he's written a book. I don't know how relevant it is now, but if you're into this kind of thing, he was a pretty cool guy. And he would mesmerize. He would go around the country and talk to software developer groups, and there were a lot of microcomputer companies. They're like DEC and TI was involved, and some of these others that had mid-sized computers. But again, they were too big. They weren't personal. They were for businesses. So he would go to some of those guys and say, "Look, you need to write product. You need to write software for our, the Mac, the Apple II." And then later for the Mac. So we had a whole program for, inviting them to conferences, giving them guides on how to write software for the Apple, that kind of thing. So that was a big program. The other thing that we did, Steve was really into big events. And I remember when we I'll tell you a little story. So we were introducing the Mac to the sales force. This was right before the launch in January of 1984. So I think it was about maybe October, and he took the whole sales force down to Acapulco. We had the whole hotel. And there were a lot of different things going on for the salespeople, nuts and bolts stuff. And then we presented the ad, and I remember I actually stood up and showed him the ad, and it was the 1984. We'll talk more about that.
We're going to show it in a minute. Yeah.
But anyway, so that was they just stood up and cheered. It was just so amazing. It was because we didn't really know if that ad was going to be, how it was very controversial even within the company.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Here's two magazines.
But I want to tell you one little story.
Yeah.
So I remember that. So one of the nights that we were in Acapulco, which was like a whole week, we had a big party. And so they took us out on buses out in the middle of nowhere, some jungle thing, but it was part of the hotel. They put events on there. And there was a program on TV called MASH. I don't know if
MASH, yeah.
And so Steve wanted to use the MASH theme. So everybody was given fatigues to wear, just a fatigue shirt. And a cap, army cap, and they set up a whole thing like a MASH camp, and everybody got metal plates, and we went through the line for our food.
The chow line.
Yeah, chow line, and then we hear this, and it's a Huey helicopter, and here comes Steve Jobs, and they land the helicopter, and here comes Steve. He hops out, and they have a stage set up. What is the group? What they do in the army where the entertainers?
USO.
USO. Yeah. So it was like a USO setup, and that Steve got up, and everybody just went crazy. And so it was one of the wildest things that I've ever been to. It was really cool. And
arriving by helicopter.
Yeah, he just came in on a helicopter.
The middle of the Korean War. Okay.
So you were talking about doing these blockbuster events,
yes,
and that's part of Apple's. Apple does it better than anybody, and still does.
So, two magazines that came out after the 1984.
I don't know this one. I don't know.
Yeah, St. Mac. There's several
I don't know that one.
editions that came out, and we have both of those in the lab if anyone wants to look at them. But this is the ad. So I'll
tell you a little bit about this.
That's right.
Okay. How much time do we have?
Yeah.
Almost up, right?
Yeah. Well, 5 minutes.
Okay. So
then we'll show the ad. Then we're going to take a break and talk.
So this guy I told you about, they named Lee Clow, was a really high up there. I've worked with a lot of creative people in advertising. He is, I would say, not a genius, but very, very talented guy. And there was a copywriter named Steve Hayden and they'd been there since when Chiat took over the account. So Lee comes into I was in the corporate advertising group. We also had a little advertising in the Mac group with a guy named Mike Murray. And then there was also a guy in the Lisa group. And so there was a little bit of, everybody wanted to do their own thing. But we had the biggest budget, and we basically called most of the shots, I would say. So Lee came in, and then Jay Chiat was very... Steve always liked dealing with the top dog, So Jay Chiat knew how to court clients, so he would only deal basically with Steve, and he took him to New York and would wine him and dine him and all of this stuff. So it was kind of tough because I was a day-to-day guy, doing a lot of the planning and the getting the money approved and doing all the administrative work and stuff, and they had this back channel with Jay Chiat, so it's always a difficult kind of spot to be in. But anyway, Lee comes into my office one day, and he shows me this one-page storyboard of the girl, this woman, and I forget her name, Anna, somebody, I forget. And
Anna who?
Anya Major.
Yes, that's right. And he said, look, I want to know what you think of this. He said, we haven't showed it to Steve yet. And I said, well, so he told me the concept. There was a book called 1984. Probably most of you know about it anyway. So this was all a very much a current thing about Big Brother, and the computers are going to take over it's like what we're going through now with AI. It's exactly very similar.
2024, we're right on schedule.
So, yeah. That's the most scary. So anyway, he came in, and so he told me the whole thing, and I said, go for it. I said, I like it. I said, it makes sense. And he gave me the rationale and the whole thing. So I'm talking through it fast. No, so he ended up showing it to Steve. He wanted to use, Chiat Day was very adamant agency. They didn't want clients telling them what to do. And so he showed it to Steve. Steve liked it. So we produced the ad. It cost $500,000, which was a lot of money. Ridley Scott had just done the movie Blade Runner. And Lee wanted to have that kind of draconian look, big, scary, threatening look of IBM. That was kind of the idea. And so he said, we got to use Ridley Scott. So I said, okay, fine, And then they came up with this idea he said, now we only want to run this once in the Super Bowl. Well, this was before Super Bowl advertising was really a thing. It was just becoming a thing. But the Super Bowl, for its time, even back then, was the number one, like it's always been, like one of the highest rated broadcasts of the year. So he said, yeah, we want to get a really good position, and we want to run a 60-second ad, which was a hell of a lot of money back then, even now. So anyway, I said, so Steve liked the idea, so we produced the ad, and then I remember, and you have the cassette on your wall, the exact cassette that was a 3/4 inch Sonomatic, what do you call it? U-matic.
Betamax.
And so we had the meeting. Of course, the problem with advertising, you can show somebody a storyboard, and everybody sees 5 people in the room are going to see it in their head different from everybody else. So you never know whether the client's really going to like it or not until you actually see it. So here was the moment of truth. We're all sitting in there, and I think there were maybe 7 or 8 people, and we were seeing the finished production. And this thing had been shot in the largest soundstage in London. And they had used these skinhead guys were called Packy Busters. And they hired them as extras to sit there and go like this. And so Ridley did a great job. So we show this ad, and Scully had been working at Apple. He'd been there 6 months. And I could tell.
Explain who Scully is. I mean, because that's part of this, right?
Pardon? Yeah.
Explain or describe
So
who Scully
we showed
is.
the ad, and I'm always looking around with clients and stuff. You looking around to see, do they like it? Do they like it? Do they like it? Who likes it? Who doesn't like it? And I could see that Scully was like blown out of his chair. He just like, what? Because he'd been doing Pepsi commercials, right? He was the CEO of Pepsi before he came to Apple.
And he'd only been there a few months.
He'd only been there like 5 months,
Yeah.
right? But he had a really, if you read that book, the Isaacson book, it talks about he and Steve had this sick relationship, that went south really quick.
Yeah.
But I was in a couple, 3 early meetings with Scully, and I said, I don't get this guy. I really don't. And nobody else did either. But he did not like the commercial. But Steve loved it. But Scully went to the board and said, we need to show this to the board. This is too out there. And so they showed it to the board, and they had a vote, and the board voted to do it. So the rest is history.
Okay.
And we ran that ad once in the Super Bowl. We did run it as a spot ad in about 3 other markets, and that's it. And I mean, it's the best free ad. I mean, they're still getting mileage out of it. So this idea of doing these blockbuster ads, there we go.
I don't see any light control here.
These were the Packy Busters.
Yeah, try it. Yeah. Oh. Keep going. There we go.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
There you go.
Is anybody seeing this for the first time? Right.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I left Apple after that, and after 3 months after that ad, we had a reorg, and I got a new boss I didn't like, so I left. But they ran another ad a year later, which is also famous, called the Lemmings ad. Do you all know the Lemmings ad? So this was the idea that IBM, if you bought an IBM, you were just a corporate bozo. You were just kind of like following. You're not thinking. You're just buying the safe alternative. And that one also was very controversial. I read. I wasn't there. And Chiat Day went on they went on record saying, "Look, if you don't run this ad, we're going to resign." And so they ran the ad, and the board, everybody at Apple, a lot of the board was concerned, and it turned out to be a massive flop. Got a lot of criticism and stuff, and it cost Chiat Day, the agents, their job. They went to BBDO. Yeah. So,
One success and one flop.
Exactly.
So I think that's a good place to stop and let's talk about some questions or feedback or.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
In the movie Pilots of Silicon Valley, it starts off with Noah Wyle playing Steve Jobs. He's in the studio while they're making the commercial. Did that happen, do you know? Or is that just for the movie?
I didn't see that, so I don't know, but I will tell you one story. So there was a brief period of time when I first got to Apple, they were using a guy named Dick Cavett. How many know Dick Cavett? Okay. All right, so Dick Cavett was a famous talk show host. He was kind of like the John Oliver of the day, kind of the intellectual guy. And he was a very talented guy. And so Steve liked him, and Jay Chiat liked him, and so they signed him up to be our spokesperson. And it was a complete disaster. I think we made 6 commercials with him, mostly used for co-op. He was too intelligent, too much of an
Erudite, yeah.
erudite guy, erudite or whatever, and kind of arrogant, and it just didn't work. So anyway, I got there just as we were winding him down, and we were shooting a Christmas. I think it was the last commercial with Dick Cavett, and we were shooting a Christmas commercial, and so I think it was my idea. I thought, well, Steve might want to see how a commercial's made, so I took him on the plane. He said, yeah, I would. So we went down. It was being shot at a place in Burbank studio. And we went down, and Steve was there, and we saw, Dick Cavett do his thing. And I think we only ran the ad as a co-op ad because it was nobody like Dick Cavett. So, that was it. But one story I will tell, people love anecdotes. When I was on the plane with Steve, I was, 5 years older than he was, something like that, maybe more. I was 31, he was, 5 or 6 years different. So he's asking, we're talking on the plane, he said, may I ask you a personal question? I said, sure, Steve, what's your question? He said, well, what do you think about a younger man dating an older woman? And I said, I think it would depend on the woman. And I said, anybody I know. And he says, well, as a matter of fact, it is. You probably know her. I said, Joan Baez. And I said, no way. I said, hell yes, I would date her. Because I learned to play guitar listening to Joan Baez. And Steve, she was one of his heroes. And Steve had bought this big old mansion in Woodside. And Joan Baez had a place in Woodside and still lives there. And so Woodside's this little teeny town.
I lived there.
Yeah.
With Joan Baez.
Yeah. And there's only
not with
3 or 4 places to meet. There's nothing there. So I'm sure he met her there. And I don't know how long he dated her or how long that lasted. But anyway, that's a little
You're
trivia
good for dating advice. That's
Pardon?
what you're good for dating advice is what I'm getting from this anecdote. Yes.
Yeah, there was another time. Steve was weird that way.
Other dating advice questions?
Yeah.
Are there other questions? I'm gonna let's go.
Yeah, let's go to the questions.
Yeah.
I have one.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask if you'd seen it or what your opinion was on did you see the epic parody of the 1984 commercial?
No. I think maybe I did. Refresh me.
The Epic versus Apple lawsuit a couple of years ago. It's literally a shot-for-shot parody, but Apple is the bad guy, and it's...
I'd love to see that.
One of the Epic video games. It's called 1980 Fortnite.
Oh.
Wait, what is it?
1980 Fortnite.
I'll definitely look at that.
It's
Let me see if I can... Fort, like just N-I-T-E?
Yeah, it's F-O-R-T-N-I-T-E, but it's...
Okay.
So, tell me more.
It's just a shot-for-shot parody of this commercial.
Okay.
And so I didn't know
I can't
if you'd
see
seen
my
it or-
screen.
No.
There it is. 1980.
Here, we're going to all watch it now.
Okay, yeah, let's see.
Wait, here.
In exchange, we have taken our tribute, our profits, our control. This power is ours and ours. We shall prevail.
And then this is the
Oh, okay.
opening for their lawsuit.
I didn't... Whatever happened with this lawsuit?
I think they ended up settling it. They ended up settling it, and then because the EU passed that law that basically forced Apple to open up the App Store anyway. So.
Well, Apple's, the feds have just filed an antitrust thing, or anti-monopoly thing, which I think is a disaster, would be a disaster. They want to break Apple up, and they didn't break Microsoft up. So, my God, if they didn't break Microsoft up, I hope the hell they don't break up Apple. Because Apple, that was another thing that Steve's idea from the very beginning. He wanted to control the whole system because he felt if you have hardware and software, and now they're doing their own processors, the more integration you have, the better for the customer. And it's none of the Fed's business to go in there and mess with that, in my view. So,
We have a few more minutes for questions.
any other questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you seen the latest iPad commercial where they have all those?
Crush.
Oh.
I love it.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Talk about that.
I do love
Talk
it,
about
but
that.
I can understand why a lot of people didn't. I think they missed the humor in it.
Anyone
That
want-
was like the Lemmings commercial. You know, it was pretty, but I love the commercial. It was really well
I
done.
love that Apple will not pull down a commercial, no matter how controversial it is. They'll put it up. That iPad commercial is still up on their YouTube channel.
Yeah, that's the thing.
this it?
Commercials never die now.
Anyone-
Once they're made, they're
This is it.
The most powerful iPad ever is also the thinnest.
yeah. That's unfortunate.
I mean, it's better than that awful iPad commercial from a few years ago. The what is a computer?
I don't remember that one.
It's this girl going around and she's got an iPad and she's using it like in school and taking notes and she takes pictures and she's like doing a project on it and then
Yeah.
she comes home and she's in the backyard and she's on her iPad and the neighbor walks up to her and the neighbor's like, "Oh, that's cool. What kind of computer is that?" And the girl just goes, "What's a computer?"
Oh, geez. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know. No comment.
Yeah.
But you know, I don't know how many people Apple has in their advertising department. Must be. I mean, when I was there, I had 6 people working with me, plus the agency, and I imagine they have, who knows, dozens. So to go through getting a campaign actually through all the channels and everything, it's a lot of fingers in the pie. So it's amazing.
Which is amazing. How did this happen?
Yeah, I don't know.
Like,
Because the message, I mean, some people, I don't know, I think some people just didn't get the messaging. I know there were people that believed the messaging was that Apple was going to use the new iPad to kill off all the art, not kill off, but like, you know, kill the jobs of all the artists and stuff.
Well, exactly the opposite.
Yeah, but I felt like the messaging was that this iPad can just replace those tools.
Exactly. It's an ultra tool. You can do everything. Yeah, I don't.
that is a
you know,
very generous reading, I think.
Yeah.
Do any more questions?
I actually,
But we should talk about that in more detail because it's
but
really
I have,
interesting.
something I was just curious about if y'all did this when y'all were there. When Apple announces like new products or new features or whatever, if you watch really closely, they will avoid talking about certain topics or things that maybe not wouldn't hurt the brand but like maybe aren't the best thing in like the current conversation or like so like we have AI we're talking about a lot right now in modern advertising and technology and stuff. And then Apple rebrands it as Apple Intelligence. Or when they announced the Vision Pro, they didn't say VR a single time. They
Oh, yeah.
spatial computing,
Yeah.
right? They will come up with a new word for it. Or,
Preempt.
yeah.
Yeah.
To get ahead of it. And I was just curious if they were doing that back when you were there.
Well, we created. I don't know that Apple coined the word personal computer. I don't know. I should know. I don't know who actually coined that word.
There's a good media archaeology research project.
Yeah, or disk drive, you know, or some of these things. But Apple was very much into, like they came out with their first disk drive, hard disk was called a Profile, was with so they, yes, the answer is we branded everything with their own brand.
Yeah,
you
like
know.
they had the DVD drive and they called it what they called it, the Super Drive or whatever.
Yeah. But if you think about it too, the other part of that, there was always some technological addition that they were like. Take it for example, Apple Intelligence. Well, I just watched the developer conference, and their implementation of AI is quite different than these large scale language models, you know, OpenAI. So they wanted a lightweight model that could run in their neural engine on the chip on an iPhone, right? Which is amazing. And they also came with some methodology for the way they do the training that would allow you to train on data sets that were much smaller and still give you a high level of accuracy. So it was quite innovative. I was very impressed with Apple Intelligence and the way they've integrated it throughout the whole AI ecosystem. And the other thing that I don't know if you've heard, but I just read where Apple is not paying OpenAI and the reason they're not is because they have such a huge distribution network, like 2 billion handsets, So it's in AI's interest, OpenAI's interest, to actually partner with them. They're getting a real deal,
So this is where I thought you were going with that question, which was, are there things they don't talk about? I'm going to leave you with this just as a question. Should we care? And if you go and meet us up with the exhibition, we can talk about it.
Murders, the Nestle child slavery. We don't talk about these things.
I know, we don't. I know. So we are going to end. Let me just do a couple plugs here. So come visit the Media Archaeology Lab. It's in the building across the way, ATC 1.701. We're on the ground floor. We're open noon till 6, so today, tomorrow, and whenever the hours are for Sunday. And you'll see we have about maybe 15 vintage Apple machines up and running native OS and running native programs for that. And we have several of our team members who are, and you can't miss them because they're wearing Media Archaeology t-shirts, and they have pins if you talk to them, but only if you talk to them. And then come and see, right across from the lab is an exhibition that we kind of mounted and sponsoring, featuring many of the pieces from your early collection, including the tapes that are in shadow boxes. And this is getting at it. It's Think Different, marketing a techno-cultural revolution. An exhibit that established not only a brand, but also a new zeitgeist. And it kind of broadens the conversation about what was the longer term impact of some of these very early marketing philosophies and commitments that they had made to distinguish themselves early on. So stop by. It's right across from the lab. Come see the lab demos. So any last words? Any last questions?
I mean, I've enjoyed doing it. I've done a bunch of things since Apple, so I don't sit around thinking about my Apple days that often. So it was kind of nice to revisit it because I went back and I finally read, the autobiography and, did a little bit of, oh yeah, I remember that. That.
Yeah. So thanks.
But I'm an official curmudgeon.
Yes, you are, but well earned. And thank you so much for making the trip.
Yeah,
and
no
bringing
problem.
the pieces. Thank you.